Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Greg always believed that small gestures made a difference in a marriage. At 42, he was the kind of man who remembered birthdays, made breakfast on weekends, and left sweet notes in his wife's purse before heading off to work. As a civil engineer at a respected construction firm in Seattle, Greg kept a predictable but comfortable routine. He woke up at 6 in the morning, reviewed plans for bridges and commercial buildings, and came home at 6 in the evening, when Lisa was usually already making dinner or reviewing architectural blueprints at the living room table. Lisa, at 39, was an architect at a boutique firm called Hendricks & Associates, which specialized in high-end residential projects. She had a genuine talent for transforming spaces, blending functionality with aesthetics in a way that impressed even the most demanding clients. The couple had met 11 years earlier at a conference on sustainable construction, where Greg was presenting innovative structural solutions and Lisa was showcasing portfolios of eco-friendly homes. The chemistry had been instant. They married 2 years later in an intimate ceremony on Whidbey Island, surrounded by close friends and family. The following years were marked by stability and partnership. They bought a craftsman-style house in the Ballard neighborhood, complete with a front garden and a porch where they enjoyed wine on summer evenings. They didn't have children, a mutual decision made after long conversations about careers and lifestyle. Both invested heavily in their professions and appreciated the freedom that came with not having dependents. They traveled to Vancouver, Canada, every 3 months, explored trails in the Cascade Mountains, and maintained an active social circle with other couples from the construction and design industries. It was on a Thursday in October, as the neighborhood trees began to turn gold, that Greg noticed something different. He was in the living room reviewing concrete specifications when Lisa came home with unusual energy. She practically floated through the door, her eyes sparkling with excitement Greg hadn't seen in months. Before even taking off the gray coat she wore over her black dress, she thrust her left wrist out in front of him. "Look at this," she said, her voice full of pride. Greg set his reading glasses on the table and focused on the object catching the light from the chandelier. It was an Omega Seamaster, a model he immediately recognized, having researched something similar for himself a few years earlier. The deep blue dial reflected unmistakable quality, and the stainless steel bracelet was immaculately polished. He knew that model easily cost $8,000. "Wow," Greg said, genuinely impressed. "That's incredible. Where did it come from?" Lisa sat down beside him on the couch, still admiring her wrist. "Patricia gave it to me today. Completely out of the blue. She called everyone into the conference room after lunch and gave a speech about how the Whitmore project was an absolute success. Remember that impossible client who wanted to change everything every week? We delivered on time and within budget, and he was so happy he's already referred us to 2 of his millionaire friends." Greg smiled, taking her hand to examine the watch more closely. It felt substantial on her wrist, the kind of piece that made a quiet statement about status and achievement. "Patricia gave you this as a thank you?" "Exactly. She said it was my work that saved the project. All those late-night revisions, the weekends I spent redoing elevations because the client kept changing his mind." Lisa leaned back against the couch, exhaustion mingling with satisfaction visible in her relaxed shoulders. "She said I deserve all the recognition." Greg kissed her forehead, feeling a genuine pang of pride. Lisa worked hard, that was undeniable. There were nights she came home after 10, exhausted but determined, carrying the scent of cold coffee and corporate stress. Seeing her effort acknowledged in this way seemed fair, almost poetic. "I'm really proud of you," he said, and in that moment, he truly meant every word. In the weeks that followed, Lisa wore the watch constantly. Greg noticed how she checked the time more often, as if the motion gave her an excuse to admire the gift. He also noticed she spent more time on her phone, glancing at messages during dinner with brief smiles before flipping the screen face down on the table. When he asked about work, Lisa mentioned new projects, demanding clients, and meetings that ran past business hours. Greg wasn't naturally suspicious. His analytical mind tended to accept logical explanations, and Lisa's routine seemed consistent with busy periods at the office. He himself went through phases where critical construction sites demanded intensive oversight and overtime. That was just the rhythm of the industry, he reasoned. The Hendricks and Associates quarterly gathering was scheduled for the first Friday in November. The firm rented space at a modern restaurant downtown with views of Elliott Bay, where staff and select clients came together to celebrate recent achievements and strengthen professional relationships. Lisa mentioned the event over breakfast one Tuesday, casually noting that Greg was welcome to attend, though she didn't expect him to. These corporate parties tended to be dull for people who didn't work at the firm. But Greg had an idea. He decided it would be a classy gesture to stop by briefly, personally thank Patricia, and express appreciation for the recognition she'd given Lisa. After all, an $8,000 gift wasn't trivial. It would show grace and gratitude, qualities Greg valued in both professional and personal interactions. On Thursday afternoon, he left the office early and visited a gourmet shop in Capitol Hill. He carefully selected a premium wine basket, a bottle of Chateauneuf du Pape, another of Italian Barolo, and a third of Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, accompanied by artisanal cheeses and Belgian chocolates. He spent $300, but it felt appropriate given Patricia's generosity. He wrapped everything in clear cellophane with a gold ribbon, pleased with how it looked. On Friday night, Greg wore a navy blazer over a white shirt and gray trousers, nothing too formal, but respectable. Lisa seemed nervous as she got ready, changing dresses 3 times before settling on a burgundy one Greg had always complimented. She applied her makeup more carefully than usual, checked her reflection in the mirror multiple times, and when Greg picked up the wine basket and said he was ready, she hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go?" "These things are really boring," she said, adjusting her earring for the 4th time. Greg laughed. "I'll just say hello to your boss, have a glass of wine, and we'll leave. 30 minutes, I promise." The restaurant was lively when they arrived at 7:30. Soft yellow lights created a welcoming atmosphere, and the murmur of conversation mixed with discreet jazz music playing through the speakers. Greg recognized a few of Lisa's colleagues from past events. They gave polite nods as the couple moved through the room. Lisa seemed tense, her eyes scanning the space in a way Greg interpreted as normal social anxiety. Patricia Hendricks stood near the bar, talking to a man in a gray suit Greg didn't recognize. She was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair cut in an elegant bob and a posture that conveyed decades of professional authority. When Lisa and Greg approached, Patricia broke into a genuine smile. "Lisa. So glad you came. And this must be the famous Greg," she said, extending her hand. Greg shook it firmly, returning the smile. "It's a real pleasure to finally meet you in person, Patricia. Lisa speaks highly of the firm." "She's one of our stars," Patricia replied, casting an affectionate glance at Lisa, who smiled back, though Greg noticed it looked forced. He lifted the wine basket, presenting it with care. "I wanted to bring this as a thank you. The gift you gave Lisa was incredibly generous." The Omega watch was such a beautiful acknowledgement of her work. Patricia's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She looked at the basket, then at Lisa, then back at Greg. A crease of confusion formed between her eyebrows. "Watch? What watch?" The air around them seemed to cool. Greg felt the basket grow heavier in his hands. "The Omega Seamaster. You gave it to Lisa for the success of the Whitmore project." Patricia slowly shook her head, confusion shifting into something more uncomfortable. "Greg, I never gave Lisa a watch. Or any employee, for that matter. We have strict company policies against expensive personal gifts. It could set complicated precedents and raise favoritism issues." The silence that followed was suffocating. Greg turned to Lisa, whose face had gone completely pale. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted desperately between Greg and Patricia, searching for an escape that didn't exist. There must have been a misunderstanding, Lisa finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the party's ambient noise. Patricia frowned, now genuinely worried. Lisa, is everything okay? Where did that watch come from? Greg didn't wait for an answer. He set the wine basket on the nearest table with mechanical movements and took Lisa by the elbow, firm but not aggressive. Excuse us, Patricia. We need to go. They crossed the restaurant in deadly silence. Lisa stumbled once in her high heels, but Greg steadied her without a word. In the car, neither spoke during the 15-minute drive home. Greg gripped the steering wheel tightly, jaw clenched. Lisa stared out the window, silent tears smudging her carefully applied makeup. When they pulled into the garage, Greg turned off the engine but didn't get out right away. He turned to face her, and something in his gaze made Lisa shrink back against the passenger door. Who gave you the watch? Greg asked, his voice low but charged with something dangerous. Lisa sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Greg, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Who gave you the watch? Adrian, she whispered through her fingers. Adrian Kensington. The name hit Greg like a punch to the gut. Adrian Kensington was one of Hendricks and Associates' wealthiest clients, a divorced real estate developer who'd built his fortune on commercial properties across the Puget Sound region. Greg knew him only by reputation, stories Lisa occasionally mentioned about the demanding but generous client who always requested top-tier designs and paid without question. How long? Greg asked, and it was striking how steady his voice remained as his world collapsed. 8 months, Lisa admitted, her voice breaking completely. Greg got out of the car and walked into the house without looking back. Lisa followed, stumbling over her own feet, still crying. He went straight to their shared upstairs office, where they both kept important documents and personal computers. He turned on his laptop and began typing with controlled fury. Greg, please, listen to me, Lisa pleaded from the doorway. No, he replied without taking his eyes off the screen. Don't talk to me right now. He stayed up all night. While Lisa eventually gave up trying to talk and locked herself in the guest room, sobbing, Greg dug through finances, bank accounts, and credit card statements. His analytical mind, trained to spot structural flaws in engineering projects, now applied that same relentless methodology to dissect the past 8 months of his marriage. The patterns emerged with devastating clarity. There were charges at boutique hotels in Bellevue and Kirkland, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays when Lisa claimed to be working late. Expensive restaurants he'd never visited with her. A $1,200 charge at a downtown lingerie boutique he'd never seen her wear. The expenses came from their joint credit card, which Greg rarely reviewed in detail, trusting that they were both financially responsible. As the Seattle sky began to brighten at 6 in the morning, tinting the low clouds pink and orange, Greg had assembled a complete dossier. He hadn't slept a wink. His eyes burned, but his mind had never been clearer. He picked up the phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Marcus Chen, a private investigator who'd worked with Greg's construction firm a few years earlier on bidding fraud cases. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring, his voice rough with sleep. Marcus, it's Greg Holloway. I need to hire you. Today. The second call was to Jonathan Weiss, a divorce attorney whose reputation in Seattle was legendary. Jonathan started his day early, and by 7:15 a.m., he was already in his office when Greg called. I need your services, Greg said, his voice flat. I want to start divorce proceedings immediately. Marcus moved quickly. Using contacts in private security and access to parking lot surveillance footage, he gathered images documenting Lisa's betrayal in painful detail. On Saturday afternoon, he handed Greg a manila envelope filled with photographs. There were shots of Lisa entering Adrian's luxury residential building in Bellevue, time-stamped to match exactly the overtime hours she'd claimed. One especially devastating photo showed Adrian kissing Lisa on his balcony, the two of them embraced as the sun set over Lake Washington in the background. Marcus also uncovered information about Adrian that Greg hadn't expected. The man had a track record, a well-documented pattern of affairs with women who worked for or with him. His ex-wife had cited multiple infidelities in their divorce proceedings 3 years earlier. There were persistent, unproven rumors that he recorded intimate encounters without his partner's consent, allegedly as insurance against future accusations or blackmail. "That guy's poison," Marcus said as he handed over the report. "Sorry I had to show you this, Greg." Greg accepted the envelope without visible emotion. "You did your job. Thanks." Over the weekend, Lisa tried to start conversations multiple times. She drifted through the house like a ghost, eyes swollen and red, bringing coffee that Greg ignored, trying to sit near him on the couch only for him to stand and leave the room. On Sunday night, she finally snapped. "Aren't you even going to let me explain?" Lisa shouted, frustration and desperation mixing equally in her voice. Greg was in the kitchen, mechanically making a sandwich. He turned slowly to face her, and the coldness in his eyes made her take a step back. "Explain what, exactly, Lisa? Explain how you fucked our client in fancy hotels paid for with our money? Explain how you lied to my face for 8 months? Explain how you wore that watch he gave you every single day, knowing full well I believed your pathetic story about Patricia?" Each word was sharp, precise. What possible explanation could make any of this acceptable? Lisa started crying again. "I don't know how it happened. He was attentive when I was stressed about the project. He listened. He made me feel special." "And me?" Greg asked, his voice dangerously low. 11 years together didn't make you feel special enough? "It's not about you," she sobbed. "You're wrong. It's exactly about me. About us. About everything we built, and that you burned down because some rich developer gave you attention." He picked up the sandwich and tossed it in the trash, his appetite completely gone. "Monday morning at 9, we're having a talk. Until then, don't speak to me." On Monday, Greg woke at 6 as usual, dressed in a full suit, something he rarely wore for regular work, and brewed a strong pot of coffee. At 8:45 a.m., he was sitting in the dining room with his laptop open and papers meticulously laid out in front of him when Lisa came downstairs. She wore jeans and a sweater, no makeup, her hair pulled back carelessly. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in 3 days. "Sit," Greg ordered, pointing to the chair across from him. Lisa obeyed, her hands trembling as they rested on the table. Greg opened his laptop and turned the screen so she could see. It was their bank statement, with dozens of charges highlighted in yellow. Bellevue Club Hotel, 23 times over the past 8 months. Always Tuesdays and Thursdays. Average of $350 a night. Total, $8,050. He clicked to the next page. Canlis Restaurant, 12 dinners. Average of $400 each. Total, $4,800. Another page. La Belle Lingerie, $1,200. Sanctuary Spa, $870. Petals and Stems Florist, $640 on gifts I never received. Lisa covered her mouth, choking on sobs. Greg continued relentlessly. Total spending related to your affair, $15,560. From our money. Money that was supposed to go toward our retirement, our vacations, our life. Greg, I'll pay it back, Lisa tried. With what money, Lisa? Your salary goes straight into the joint account. He closed the laptop and pulled out the envelope of photographs. He slid 3 images across the table. Lisa glanced at them and immediately turned away, more tears falling. These were taken by a private investigator I hired. You entering his apartment. The two of you on the balcony. Him kissing you. All documented, dated, time-stamped. Greg leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Now I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Lisa looked up, pure terror written across her face. You're going to sign the divorce papers my lawyer prepared. We'll split the house and assets equitably under Washington state law, but I'll keep all investments in my name since I can prove you diverted marital funds for infidelity, which my lawyer says could work in my favor during asset division. He slid another sheet across the table. You have until Friday to agree amicably, or this goes to court, where all of this, he tapped the photo envelope, becomes public record. You wouldn't do that, Lisa whispered. Test me. A long silence followed. Then Lisa asked, her voice tiny, did you tell Adrian? Greg smiled, but there was no humor in it. Not yet. But I will. Please don't. He could, he has. He has what, Lisa? Greg leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Tell me. Lisa closed her eyes, breathing rapidly. He records things. Encounters. He told me it was for his protection, in case a woman ever tried to accuse him of something. But I don't know what he does with the recordings. The anger Greg had kept tightly controlled threatened to explode. His hands clenched into fists on the table. You got involved with a guy who records you without your consent? Are you aware that's a crime in Washington? I know. I know, Greg. I was an idiot. I ruined everything. Lisa buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with violent sobs. Greg forced himself to take a deep breath, regaining his composure. He picked up the phone and dialed the number Marcus had given him. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered. Claire Kensington. Yes, who's this? My name is Greg Holloway. We haven't met, but I have information about your ex-husband Adrian that I believe you should know. Lisa jerked her head up, eyes wide with panic. She made a desperate gesture for him to hang up, but Greg turned his back on her. The call lasted 20 minutes. Claire, surprisingly calm given the content, confirmed Greg's suspicions about Adrian. She'd discovered recordings herself during the divorce but hadn't had enough evidence to press charges at the time. She thanked Greg for the information and said she'd contact her lawyer immediately. When Greg hung up, Lisa was practically catatonic in her chair. What did you do? She whispered. What should have been done 3 years ago, Greg replied. Claire's going after him legally. If he really recorded you without consent, you may have grounds for criminal charges too, if you want to pursue it. But that's your choice. And the firm? Patricia? Greg shrugged. That's also your choice. You can tell her or not. But given that Adrian's a major client of Hendricks, I'd imagine there'd be an obvious conflict of interest if this came out. He paused, letting the implication hang. Maybe you should consider looking for a new job. In the weeks that followed, Lisa's life unraveled in slow motion. She signed the divorce papers on Thursday, just 2 days after Greg's ultimatum. The divorce would be finalized in 90 days, as required by Washington state law. The house was listed for sale, and while they waited for a buyer, Greg moved into the guest room, turning their cohabitation into a cold coexistence. Claire Kensington sued Adrian both civilly and criminally. The police investigation led to a search warrant that uncovered dozens of videos stored on encrypted drives, including 4 featuring Lisa. Adrian was arrested and charged with multiple counts of illegal voyeurism. The story leaked to local media, and his name was dragged through every Seattle news outlet. Hendricks and Associates immediately severed all ties with Adrian, issuing a public statement condemning his actions. Patricia called Lisa in for a private meeting where, according to Lisa's later rare account to Greg, she was given the choice to resign quietly or be fired for conduct that violated company policies regarding client relationships. Lisa resigned. Greg, on the other hand, found strange comfort in diving into his work. He accepted a challenging project to build a bridge over the Snohomish River, something that would require intensive oversight for the next 18 months. The long hours on site were welcome, offering a distraction from the mess his personal life had become. 3 months later, when the final divorce papers were signed and the house sold for above the asking price, Greg and Lisa met one last time at Jonathan Weiss's office for the final asset division. It was a brief, clinical encounter. Lisa seemed smaller somehow, her shoulders slumped, her eyes avoiding his. She signed where instructed, accepted the check for her half of the house sale, and left without a word. Greg later heard through mutual friends that Lisa had moved to Portland, starting work at a smaller, less prestigious architecture firm. Adrian Kensington went to trial, was found guilty on 5 of 8 charges, and sentenced to 18 months in prison plus community service and registration as a sex offender. His real estate fortune suffered as investors and partners distanced themselves from the scandal, copiato, 4-4. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Greg was at the Seattle Center during a food and wine festival when he saw Lisa. She was with a man he didn't recognize, both of them laughing as they sampled artisanal cheeses. Lisa looked well, maybe even lighter, but when her eyes accidentally met Greg's through the crowd, her smile died on her lips. She grabbed her companion's arm and quickly turned away, disappearing among the vendor stalls. Greg watched for a moment, feeling nothing. No anger, no pain, no nostalgia. Just a familiar emptiness, a scar where an open wound once was. He turned and kept walking, tasting wines that didn't matter, listening to music he didn't register, existing in a carefully cultivated state of neutrality. It wasn't until he got back to his new apartment that night, a smaller, more modern place than the house he'd shared with Lisa, that Greg allowed himself to truly think about it all. He poured bourbon into a heavy glass and sat on the balcony, watching the city lights blink in every direction. 11 years reduced to legal signatures and furniture division. An expensive watch, bought with lies, that had destroyed everything. He thought about the Omega watch, that piece supposedly given by Patricia as recognition. He wondered where it was now. Lisa had probably sold it, or maybe kept it as a bizarre keepsake of a monumental mistake. It didn't really matter. Greg's phone buzzed. A message from Carla, a structural engineer he'd met at a professional conference last month. She was asking if he'd like to have dinner during the week. Greg stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a positive reply. Maybe it was time to start allowing possibilities again. But as he hit send, a part of him, the part still carrying invisible scars, whispered warnings. Trust, once broken like this, never fully returned. There were permanent cracks, weak points in the foundation that engineers like him knew well. You could build over them, reinforce them, adapt to them. But they never completely disappeared. Greg sipped his bourbon slowly, letting the liquid burn as it went down, and thought about broken foundations and possible rebuilds, while Seattle blinked indifferently around him, full of lives and stories and betrayals and fresh starts, an endless cycle that never stopped turning. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.